In the ashes, a dying mother hid her daughter, and the man who found her was no ordinary farmer. People woke early, worked hard, and shared what little they had with their neighbors. Children ran barefoot through narrow lanes, their laughter echoing over the rooftops, and the smell of fresh bread and sweet herbs often floated in the warm air. Among the villagers lived Layla, a gentle woman in her early 30s who was known for her kindness and quiet strength. She had a small house at the edge of the village, close to the forest, and in it she lived with her daughter Amira, a little girl of 5 with bright eyes and an infectious smile. Layla had not always been healthy. Since Amira's birth, she had struggled with a chronic illness that often left her exhausted. Even on her best days, she moved slowly and carefully, making sure she had the energy to care for her daughter. Despite this, she loved life and loved Amira more than anything. Every morning, she would wake her daughter gently, brush her hair, and prepare a small breakfast. Together, they would sit by the window, watching the village slowly come alive with people going about their daily work. Layla often dreamed of a better life for Amira, a life where she could grow up safe and happy, far from worries and illness. One summer, the weather turned unusually hot. The sun beat down relentlessly, making the fields dry and brittle. The villagers were anxious because the forest surrounding their homes had become dangerously dry. Fires had started in nearby regions, and the wind had begun to carry sparks and smoke closer to the village. Still, most people hoped the danger would pass, believing their small village was too remote to be affected. Layla, however, had a quiet worry in her heart. She could feel the tension in the air, the smell of smoke faint but growing stronger each day. She could not leave her daughter behind, and yet she knew the forest, once a place of comfort and beauty, could become a trap in an instant. One afternoon, as the sun hung high and the heat pressed down on every roof and street, a flicker of smoke appeared on the horizon. It started small, barely noticeable, but the wind picked it up, and soon the thin gray wisp became a growing column of smoke. Villagers ran to their fields, trying to assess the danger, but the fire moved fast, driven by the dry wind. The heat became unbearable, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. Children clung to their mothers, and families called to each other, trying to gather everyone before the flames reached the village. Layla, holding Amira close, felt a cold fear grip her chest. She knew she could not outrun the fire. Her body, weak from illness, could not carry them both to safety. She thought about the forest near her home, the hollow under the fallen trees where she sometimes hid from sudden storms when Amira was small. A desperate plan began to form in her mind. She whispered to Amira, keeping her voice calm despite the fear rising in her chest. "Listen to me, my little one," she said softly, brushing Amira's hair from her forehead. "I want you to be brave. There is a safe place, a hiding place, where you must stay until help comes. You must be very quiet, understand? I will find you again, I promise." Amira, sensing the urgency in her mother's voice, nodded slowly, her small hands clutching her mother's shirt. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the flickering flames in the distance. Layla wrapped her in a warm blanket, one that she had kept for special occasions, now serving a different purpose, to shield her daughter from heat, smoke, and fear. Carefully, she carried Amira to the hollow near the edge of the forest, a place she had prepared long before, thinking it might one day be needed for emergencies. The hollow was small but sturdy, formed by a fallen tree with its roots creating a natural shelter. Layla placed Amira inside, tucking the blanket around her tightly. "Stay here, my love. Do not come out for anything. Be very quiet and trust that someone will find you." She kissed Amira's forehead, feeling her daughter tremble in her arms. Amira clung to her mother, and Layla felt the weight of both love and fear pressing on her chest. She knew the fire could reach the forest, that the smoke could make it hard to breathe, but she also knew she could not carry Amira further without risking both their lives. Her plan was desperate, but it was the only chance her daughter had. As Layla stepped back, she looked around, memorizing every tree, every fallen branch, every small mark in the earth that could help her remember this place. She wanted to leave without leaving traces, yet she could not hide her fear. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant cracking branches and the smell of smoke closer. She whispered one last promise. "Be brave, Amira. I will come back for you, I promise." Then, with tears streaming down her face, she turned and ran toward the village, trying to distract herself from the pain in her lungs and the panic in her heart. The fire had spread faster than anyone expected. It roared through the village with a terrifying speed. consuming wooden homes, fences, and dry fields. Villagers screamed and shouted, grabbing whatever they could carry and fleeing to safer areas. Layla ran among them, offering help to neighbors when she could, but always keeping the memory of Amira hidden in her mind. She felt a strange mixture of strength and weakness, adrenaline and fatigue, as she moved through the chaos. Everywhere she looked, she saw destruction. Homes she had known since childhood reduced to blackened frames, animals running in panic, smoke and heat pressing down on everyone. Despite the overwhelming fear, Layla did not lose hope. She knew that Amira was hidden, and that knowledge gave her a small measure of courage. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, and her eyes stung from the smoke, but she pressed forward, helping those she could and moving quickly to avoid being trapped by the flames herself. Her illness made every step painful, but love gave her strength. She kept imagining Amira in the hollow, waiting quietly, trusting her, and it was this thought that pushed her forward. Finally, as the sun began to set, painting the smoke in shades of red and orange, Layla found a moment of safety on the outskirts of the village. Exhausted and barely able to stand, she sank to the ground, leaning against a tree. She watched as firefighters and villagers tried to control the fire, but it seemed relentless, unstoppable, and all around her. Homes she had known all her life were disappearing into the flames. She thought of Amira again, hidden and alone, and a wave of guilt mixed with hope washed over her. She whispered her daughter's name into the wind, praying that Amira would hear her even in the distance, and that she would be brave. Night fell and the fire began to die down in some areas, but the damage was done. The village lay in ruin, and survivors gathered wherever they could, sharing stories, water, and blankets. Some mourned, some prayed, and some simply stared in shock at the destruction. Layla, weak and coughing, moved among the survivors, helping where she could, but her thoughts never left Amira. She knew she could not return to the hollow until the morning when it might be safer. Until then, all she could do was survive and wait. By the first light of dawn, the fire had burned out in most parts, leaving behind ash, smoke, and broken trees. Layla rose, every muscle aching, and slowly made her way toward the forest edge. Her heart pounded as she remembered the hollow, the blanket, and the promise she had made. She had to find her daughter. She had to see that Amira was safe. The forest looked different in the morning light, scarred and blackened, but the hollow remained, a small shelter amid the devastation. Layla hurried toward it, but before she could reach the spot, she collapsed, overwhelmed by exhaustion, illness, and the events of the previous day. Her vision blurred, and she could only hope with every beat of her tired heart that Amira was alive and waiting for her. In that moment, the village began to wake to a new day. People emerged from temporary shelters, carrying water, food, and supplies, trying to assess the damage. Amid the ash and smoke, life was beginning again, fragile but persistent. Unseen in a small hollow under a fallen tree, Amira stirred slightly, wrapped tightly in the blanket. She was frightened and lonely but alive. The child's small chest rose and fell steadily, and for the first time since the fire began, there was a glimmer of hope. A hope that would grow in the days to come, carried forward by a quiet promise, a mother's love, and the courage of a child who would not give up. The morning. After the fire, the village was silent in a way it had never known before. The usual sounds, the clanging of tools, the chatter of children, the songs of birds, were replaced by the quiet crackle of burnt wood and the soft whisper of wind over charred fields. Ash drifted in the air like pale snow, settling on the ruins of homes, the scorched earth, and the faces of villagers who had survived. Many people moved slowly, stunned by the devastation, their eyes wide as they took in what remained of the life they had known. Families gathered in small groups, holding hands, speaking in hushed tones, and comforting each other with what little warmth and hope they could offer. Among the villagers, grief hung heavy. The fire had taken everything from some families, their homes, their animals, their tools, and their memories. Children clung to parents, unsure of what had happened, asking over and over if the fire was gone and if their homes could come back. The older villagers, who had seen other hardships before, shook their heads in disbelief, murmuring about how nothing could have prepared them for such destruction. In the midst of this, the story of Layla and her daughter Amira lingered in everyone's mind. No one had seen them after the fire began, and it was assumed that both mother and daughter had perished. Layla's absence was felt deeply, though people still spoke of her courage. They remembered how she had run into the flames to help her neighbors, how she had guided children to safety, and how she had fought to keep others calm while the fire raged. Stories about her bravery spread quietly through the village, shared in whispers, as people tried to make sense of the loss and honor the memory of a woman who had loved so fiercely. The villagers also spoke of Amira, imagining the little girl lost in the chaos, and their hearts ached at the thought of her alone in the world. They mourned both mother and daughter, holding vigils by the remains of the burned homes and offering prayers for their souls. Amira, meanwhile, remained hidden in the hollow under the fallen tree. The blanket that Layla had wrapped around her kept her warm through the cold night. Though she was frightened and alone, she remembered her mother's words. "Be brave, my love. Do not come out for anything. I will find you again." Her small body shivered not only from the night's chill but also from fear, yet she tried to be brave. She hugged the blanket tightly, pressed herself against the hollow's walls, and whispered to herself that she would wait. The hollow felt safe, despite the darkness outside, and the soft earth beneath her gave her a strange sense of comfort. Time passed slowly. Each sound outside, the distant footsteps of villagers, the rustling of animals, the occasional bird call, made Amira tense. She listened carefully, trying to decide if it was safe to make a sound or move. Hunger and thirst gnawed at her, but she remembered the small water bottle and crumbs of bread that her mother had left tucked carefully beside her. She rationed them, understanding in her own small way that these supplies were precious and could not last long. In those long hours, her thoughts returned again and again to her mother. She imagined Layla running through the village, calling her name, searching for her. She believed with a child's absolute trust that her mother would come back. The villagers, on the other hand, had begun to take action to rebuild their lives. Though many homes were destroyed, they did what they could to recover. They gathered together, clearing debris from what was left of their fields and houses, sharing tools and supplies, and offering help to those who had lost everything. Their grief was heavy, but it was tempered by the determination to survive and rebuild. Each day, as they worked, they would pause to remember the fire's victims, leaving flowers or small stones at the edge of burned areas as quiet memorials. Among these stories of loss, Amira's fate became one of the many quiet tragedies that people carried in their hearts. Some villagers began to hope that perhaps someone had survived. There were faint rumors that a child had been seen running near the edge of the forest during the fire, or that a blanket had been spotted fluttering in the wind. Most dismissed these stories as wishful thinking, an attempt to find hope in a time of despair. But a few could not let go of the idea that Layla and Amira might still be alive. They searched the charred edges of the forest, looking for signs of life, footprints, or even a small voice calling for help. Every day their hope was tested by disappointment, as no one seemed to find any trace of the missing mother or daughter. In the evenings, the village would gather together. Fires that were safe from the wind were lit, and people sat around them talking quietly. Some shared memories of lost loved ones, while others discussed practical matters: how to rebuild their homes, how to plant new crops, how to protect the village from future disasters. Children sat close to their parents, holding on tightly, and the older villagers offered stories of resilience, speaking of how they had survived other hardships and how they could survive this one too. Yet even in these moments, the story of the little girl hidden somewhere in the forest was never far from their minds. Meanwhile, Amira began to notice small signs of life around her hollow. Tiny shoots of grass had begun to appear among the ash, and small birds cautiously returned to the area, pecking at the ground. Though the fire had left destruction, it had not completely killed the forest. These signs gave her a sense of hope, a feeling that life could return, and perhaps that her mother could still find her. She remembered the way Layla had held her and whispered promises, and in her small heart, she clung to the certainty that she was not entirely alone. Days passed, and the village slowly adjusted to the new reality. Relief efforts began from neighboring areas, bringing food, water, and medicine. Volunteers helped clear roads and rebuild temporary shelters. Though the villagers were grateful, their minds were never far from the tragedy they had endured. They tried to support each other emotionally as well as physically, sharing the small joys they could find: a clean water stream, a fruit that survived the fire, or a neighbor who returned after being away during the disaster. The community's bond grew stronger, shaped by shared grief and determination. Back in the hollow, Amira's routine developed out of necessity. She would wake early, stretch, and check the small supplies her mother had left. She listened to the distant sounds of the village and tried to imagine her mother among the survivors. She created little rituals to pass the time, arranging small stones in patterns, talking softly to herself, and keeping a careful watch on the hollow's entrance. Despite the fear, she found a strange sense of peace in these routines, a feeling that she was fulfilling her mother's instructions and waiting as she had been told. The villagers, while rebuilding, often spoke of Layla's courage. They remembered how she had guided neighbors through the fire and helped children find safety. Some families, whose homes had survived, offered temporary shelter to those who had lost everything, and in doing so, shared their memories of Layla. These stories became part of the collective memory of the village, passed from one person to another. People spoke of bravery, selflessness, and hope. Though the tragedy of the fire remained, so did the reminder that kindness and courage could survive even the most devastating events. One day, a small group of villagers decided to search the forest once more. They moved carefully through the ash-covered ground, looking for signs of life. Every overturned branch, every hollow, every shadow was examined with hope and fear. They called out for anyone who might have survived, their voices carrying through the quiet, smoky air. Though they found nothing, the effort itself brought a small comfort to the villagers. It reminded them that hope, even faint, was worth holding on to. Amira, hiding quietly, sensed activity nearby. She did not understand fully who these people were, only that their voices were close and that they were moving carefully among the trees. She hugged herself tightly, whispering to herself, imagining that her mother's spirit was nearby, guiding her. The presence of the villagers, even unseen, reminded her that the world still existed beyond her hollow, and that life could continue, just as her mother had promised. Throughout these days, the village struggled to recover, but their spirit remained. Slowly, life returned in small ways. Children laughed again, though more cautiously. Families shared meals under makeshift shelters. Neighbors helped one another plant crops and repair homes. Though the fire had taken much, it had not destroyed the essence of the village, their compassion, their determination, and their hope. Stories of courage like Layla's were shared constantly, reminding everyone that even in tragedy, acts of love and bravery could shine through. Amira, though small and alone, began to understand that she was part of this world, that she had survived for a reason, and that her mother's love was with her always. She continued to wait, faithful to her mother's instructions, her heart full of hope, and her mind alive with the promise that one day she would see Layla again. And so life went on in the village. The fire had taken much, but it had not taken everything. In the midst of sorrow and loss, the villagers rebuilt their homes and their lives, carrying the memory of those they had lost and the hope of those who had survived. And in a small hollow under a fallen tree, a little girl waited quietly, embodying the courage, love, and determination that had always been part of the village's spirit. The story of Amira, hidden yet alive, became a silent promise of resilience, a promise that would one day be fulfilled in ways no one could yet imagine. Weeks passed since the fire had swept through the village, leaving behind a trail of destruction. The villagers had begun the slow process of rebuilding their homes and lives. Wooden frames of houses had been cleared, blackened earth turned over, and temporary shelters erected to protect families from the sun and rain. Life had not yet returned to normal, but people moved with determination, helping one another, sharing resources, and quietly holding onto hope. Amid this effort, a new presence appeared in the village, a man named Idris. Idris was not originally from the village. He arrived quietly, without fanfare, carrying only a few bags and the look of someone who had traveled far and seen much. He introduced himself as a farmer, and at first, people assumed he had come to offer help in rebuilding the land. Yet there was something different about him. He walked with a calm confidence, spoke with quiet authority, and carried an air of patience and knowledge that made people listen when he spoke. It was not long before the villagers noticed that Idris seemed to understand not only farming but survival itself, as though he had lived through many challenges before. He began assisting the villagers immediately. He helped clear burned fields and showed them how to plant crops that could grow even in poor soil. He guided families in rebuilding homes, offering practical tips to make structures more resilient. While working alongside them, he observed the aftermath of the fire with keen eyes, noticing details that others overlooked. The small hollows in the forest, patterns of footprints in the ash, and faint traces that could indicate survivors. His quiet attention did not go unnoticed, and soon villagers began to trust him deeply. Despite his calm and helpful demeanor, Idris carried a secret determination. He had heard rumors about a missing mother and child and had been quietly investigating the edges of the burned forest. He was not just a farmer. He had experience in survival, rescue, and observing subtle clues that others often missed. He knew that someone might have survived in the hollows of the forest, and he could not ignore the possibility of a child waiting, alone and frightened. This knowledge drove him to explore the forest carefully while still helping the villagers, blending concern for the people with his secret mission. The villagers had largely given up hope of finding Layla and Amira. They believed both had perished, taken by the fire like so many others. Yet Idris noticed things they did not. A small patch of ground that looked recently disturbed, faint imprints in ash that did not match the footprints of adults, and even the faint smell of smoke lingering in a way that suggested a fire had been nearby but extinguished. While many dismissed these signs as coincidental, Idris followed them with careful determination. He moved slowly, scanning every inch of the forest, his senses alert for any hint of life. At the edge of the burned forest, Idris found the hollow where Amira was hidden. He did not immediately reveal himself. Instead, he observed from a distance, noticing the small blanket and the faint movements of a child inside. Amira, sensing someone near, hugged the blanket tightly, her heart racing with fear. Idris spoke softly, just enough for her to hear without startling her. "Hello there, little one. I'm here to help you. Don't be afraid." His voice was calm, soothing, and carried the promise of safety. Amira's eyes widened. She did not move at first, unsure if she could trust this stranger. She remembered her mother's instructions: stay hidden, be quiet, and wait. But something in Idris's voice reminded her of her mother's warmth and calmness. Slowly, she peeked out from beneath the blanket, her small hands clutching the edges tightly. Idris smiled gently, showing no signs of rushing her or frightening her further. "I won't hurt you," he said softly. "I want to take you somewhere safe. Can you trust me?" Trusting a stranger was difficult, but Amira felt a strange connection, a sense that this man was guided by care rather than selfishness. She nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. Idris carefully reached in, helping her step out from the hollow while keeping her wrapped securely in the blanket. He lifted her into his arms, and Amira pressed herself close, feeling a mixture of fear, relief, and hope. The forest, though still blackened from the fire, seemed less threatening with Idris by her side. He moved gently, explaining in quiet tones that they would return to the village, where people could care for her, and that she was safe now. As they walked through the edge of the forest toward the village, Idris's knowledge of survival became evident. He guided Amira carefully around unstable branches and scorched ground. He noticed signs of hidden dangers, weak spots in the earth, fallen branches that could trap someone, and pockets of heat that lingered after the fire. Every step was taken with care, ensuring that Amira's small body was protected from harm. For a child who had endured weeks alone, this careful attention was a comfort, and she began to feel her fear gradually transform into trust. Back in the village, the news of Idris's presence sparked curiosity. People noticed the stranger moving among the ruins, offering advice and assistance with quiet authority. Some admired his skills, others were intrigued by his mysterious background, yet no one expected what would happen next. The villagers were in the middle of rebuilding a partially destroyed home when Idris emerged from the forest carrying Amira. The sight stopped everyone in their tracks. A small girl, alive and safe, cradled in the arms of a man they barely knew, seemed almost impossible to believe. A hush fell over the crowd. People stared at Amira, then at Idris, trying to process what they were seeing. Mothers and fathers instinctively moved closer to the child, offering comfort, while neighbors whispered in amazement about how she had survived. Slowly, the realization sank in. This was the little girl who had been lost in the fire. She was alive. Against all odds, she had survived. The villagers' grief turned to astonished joy. Their hearts lifted with the knowledge that life had returned in the form of a small, brave child who had endured so much. Amira, still wrapped in her blanket, looked around the crowd with wide, curious eyes. Though she was exhausted, frightened, and weak from her ordeal, she sensed the warmth of the people surrounding her. Idris set her down gently, speaking quietly to reassure her. "They are your friends, little one. You are safe now. You don't have to be alone anymore." The villagers, seeing her small nod of understanding, stepped forward to help, offering water, food, and comfort. Tears ran freely down faces that had long carried sorrow and fear. The reunion, though small and understated, was a moment of profound relief and hope. As the days passed, Idris remained in the village, helping with the rebuilding efforts and looking after Amira until she regained strength. He revealed more about himself in small, careful ways. He had not only been a farmer, but had trained in survival skills and emergency rescue, which explained his calmness and effectiveness in a crisis. Yet he never boasted of his abilities, preferring to work quietly and help wherever he could. His presence became a source of reassurance for the villagers, who marveled at the stranger who had found the lost child and guided her safely back. Amira slowly regained her health under the care of the villagers and Idris. She began to explore the edges of the village again, her curiosity returning with each passing day. She asked questions about the fire, about her mother, and about the man who had saved her. Idris answered patiently, telling her what he could without overwhelming her with frightening details. He spoke of bravery, survival, and hope, helping her understand that even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance for safety and care. The village itself was transformed by this event. While the fire had brought loss and despair, the survival of Amira became a symbol of resilience. People worked harder to rebuild, inspired by the story of the little girl who had survived alone. They also shared stories of Idris's quiet heroism, spreading his reputation beyond the village. Yet he remained humble, refusing recognition, and instead focused on helping others recover from the disaster. Amira began to form bonds with the villagers, slowly finding a new family among them. She laughed again, played with other children, and learned to trust people outside her mother's protection. She carried her mother's memory in her heart, and it guided her decisions and actions. She remembered her mother's love and lessons, and she began to show the strength that Layla had hoped she would possess. The villagers, seeing her resilience and gentle spirit, embraced her fully, recognizing that she was a living reminder of courage and hope. Even as life returned to some sense of normalcy, the memory of the fire lingered. The burned fields and trees remained, silent witnesses to the disaster, while the villagers worked to restore the land. The story of survival, however, became a central part of the village's identity. Children learned about bravery, care, and resilience through Amira's experience. Adults found inspiration in Idris's quiet heroism and practical wisdom. And through it all, the bond between the lost child and the man who had found her became a story whispered with gratitude, hope, and respect. Idris continued to live in the village for some time, helping the villagers and protecting Amira until she was fully settled. Though he eventually left to continue his journey elsewhere, his impact remained. The villagers remembered the lessons he taught them, not just about survival and farming, but about kindness, patience, and the quiet courage required to face adversity. Amira grew stronger every day, her mother's memory guiding her, and the village grew closer as a community, forever changed by the story of the fire, the lost child, and the man who had found her. The days that followed the fire had been heavy with both grief and determination. While the villagers worked tirelessly to rebuild, the forest at the edge of their homes remained a reminder of what had been lost. Charred trees stood like dark sentinels, their branches reaching out as if in silent mourning. Among these remnants of destruction, Idris moved carefully, searching with quiet patience. Every detail mattered to him: the small footprints in the ash, the faint marks of a blanket snagged on a branch, and even the subtle impressions in the soil that could indicate where someone had sought shelter. To an ordinary eye, it was simply a scarred forest, but to Idris, it was a place full of signs waiting to be understood. He had been returning to the edge of the forest daily, following the instinct that told him someone might have survived. Though most villagers had lost hope, Idris could not ignore the possibility that a child might still be alive. His training in survival and rescue had taught him to recognize faint signs that others overlooked. A slightly disturbed patch of dirt could indicate movement. A small indentation under a fallen branch could reveal a hiding spot. Each morning, he scanned the forest with the same careful focus, moving quietly so as not to disturb anything he might find. Amira, meanwhile, remained hidden beneath the fallen tree, her days measured by the soft sounds of the forest and her mother's words echoing in her mind. She had grown slightly stronger, her small body adapting to the shelter and limited resources her mother had provided. She ate sparingly from the crumbs and water her mother had left, careful not to waste anything. Her fear of the outside world remained, but it was tempered by hope, the hope that her mother would return or that someone kind might find her. She imagined her mother moving through the village, calling her name, and she whispered back to the empty forest, promising to wait. On one particularly quiet morning, Idris noticed something unusual. A faint trail of small footprints led deeper into the charred forest than he had explored before. They were uneven and cautious, as though the child had been walking carefully, afraid of being seen or hurt. Idris followed them slowly, studying each step, ensuring he did not miss anything. His heart beat faster with anticipation, knowing that these signs could lead to a survivor. The careful way the footprints moved confirmed his suspicion. They belonged to someone small, someone frightened but resilient. As he moved deeper, Idris noticed a faint glimmer of color beneath a fallen tree. It was the edge of a blanket, the kind that might have been left behind by someone seeking safety. He crouched down, his heart pounding, and spoke softly so that any hidden child would not be frightened. "Hello, are you there? It's safe. I am here to help you." His voice was gentle and calm, filled with warmth and reassurance. He waited patiently, knowing that any sudden movement or loud sound could frighten the child and make them retreat further into hiding. Amira stirred slightly beneath the blanket. She had heard voices in the distance before, but they were usually strangers who frightened her. This voice, however, was different. It carried kindness, and for reasons she could not fully understand, she felt that this person meant no harm. Slowly, she peeked out, her bright eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Idris smiled gently, lowering his hands so as not to appear threatening. "It's okay, I won't hurt you, you are safe now," he said softly. His calm demeanor reassured her, and after a moment of hesitation, she took a small step out from her hiding place. Idris noticed her tentative movements and kneeled to bring himself closer to her level. "My name is Idris. I want to take you somewhere safe." "Can you trust me?" he asked quietly. Amira, remembering her mother's instructions to be brave, nodded slowly. She was exhausted and weak, but a flicker of hope ignited in her heart. Idris extended his hands gently, allowing her to step into his arms. She clung to him, wrapping her small arms around his neck, and felt a sense of security she had not felt since the fire began. Idris held her carefully, making sure she was comfortable and warm, and began the slow journey back toward the village. The walk through the charred forest was quiet but filled with careful attention. Idris moved slowly, scanning the ground for unstable patches of ash, fallen branches, and hidden dangers. He whispered reassuring words to Amira, telling her she was safe and that they would soon be among friends who could care for her. The little girl pressed herself close, listening to his calm voice, and with each step her fear began to fade. Though the landscape was scarred and eerie, Idris's presence transformed it into a path toward hope. As they approached the edge of the village, the first signs of life became visible. Villagers were clearing debris, planting new crops, and rebuilding homes. The sight of other people sparked a mixture of excitement and nervousness in Amira. She clung tighter to Idris, unsure of what to expect. Idris continued to speak softly, preparing her for the reunion with others. "These are kind people," he said. "They will help you. You are safe now. Your mother would want you to be brave and trust them." The villagers noticed Idris approaching, carrying a small, trembling child in his arms. At first, they thought it might be another survivor of the fire, but as he drew closer, recognition spread across their faces. This was Amira, the missing child they had assumed lost. Gasps of astonishment filled the air, followed by a wave of relief and joy. Mothers stepped forward, children ran to get a closer look, and neighbors whispered in disbelief at the miracle before them. The village, still heavy with the memory of loss, now had a living symbol of hope in the form of the small girl who had survived alone. Amira, though exhausted and weak, began to notice the faces of people around her. They smiled gently, offered water, and spoke kind words. Idris set her down carefully, staying close to ensure she felt safe. "These are your friends," he said. "You don't have to be afraid. You are not alone anymore." Amira's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of relief. She had been alone for so long, and now she was among people who cared. The villagers welcomed her warmly, offering blankets, food, and gentle words of comfort. In the days that followed, Idris remained with the village to help both with the rebuilding efforts and with Amira's recovery. He provided guidance on safe ways to rebuild homes, plant new crops, and care for animals. Yet his greatest contribution was the care he gave to the little girl. He helped her regain strength, teaching her to eat small meals, drink water safely, and rest properly. Each day, Amira grew a little stronger, her confidence returning alongside her health. She began to smile again, laugh softly, and even play with other children under Idris's watchful eyes. The villagers were deeply grateful. Idris's quiet heroism had not only saved Amira, but had also brought a sense of hope back to the community. They marveled at his skills, humility, and patience. While some assumed he was merely a helpful stranger, those who knew him better understood that he had experience far beyond ordinary farming. His ability to read the land, interpret subtle signs, and act with calm precision had been instrumental in saving the child. Yet he never boasted about his accomplishments, focusing instead on the needs of the village and the safety of Amira. Amira's bond with Idris grew stronger with each passing day. She began to trust him completely, following his guidance and listening to his advice. He taught her small lessons about survival, kindness, and resilience, always careful to do so in a gentle and reassuring way. Though she often asked about her mother, Idris answered carefully, reminding her that her mother's love remained with her, and that she had survived because her mother had prepared her so well. These conversations helped Amira process her fear and grief while building confidence in her own strength. The village itself began to recover more fully. Inspired by Amira's survival and Idris's help, people worked harder to restore their homes, plant new crops, and repair damaged structures. There was laughter again, soft and cautious at first, and then growing stronger as life returned to a sense of normalcy. Children ran through the lanes, families shared meals, and neighbors offered support to those still struggling. The story of Amira's survival became a shared memory, a story of hope, courage, and the extraordinary care of a stranger who had saved a life against overwhelming odds. Over time, the villagers began to understand the full significance of Idris's actions. He had not only found a child lost in the fire, but had ensured her safe return with care and precision. They spoke of his calmness, his ability to notice small signs, and his unwavering focus on the safety of the little girl. In a village that had known despair, Idris became a symbol of quiet strength and wisdom. His presence reminded them that even in the darkest moments, acts of kindness and courage could transform lives. Amira, under the guidance of Idris and the support of the village, began to regain a sense of security and belonging. She laughed, played, and learned again, slowly reclaiming the childhood that had been threatened by disaster. Though she would always carry memories of the fire and her time alone, she also carried the knowledge that she had survived, that she was loved, and that she had been guided by a person of extraordinary skill and kindness. Her story became part of the village's collective memory, a story of resilience that would be told for generations. Through Idris's careful attention, Amira's first steps back into normal life were filled with gentle guidance. He taught her to walk carefully on uneven ground, to observe her surroundings, and to trust both her instincts and the adults around her. She learned about the land, about small tasks that could help in rebuilding, and about the importance of patience and courage. Each day she grew stronger, her small frame carrying the promise of life and the enduring presence of her mother's love. The bond between Idris and Amira also helped the villagers see that heroism could take many forms. It was not only in grand acts, but also in quiet care, observation, and steady guidance. The child had survived because someone had been willing to notice the smallest signs, act patiently, and offer gentle reassurance. Idris's example inspired many in the village to care more attentively for one another, fostering a renewed sense of community and compassion. The village had slowly begun to heal from the fire, but its true recovery came not only from rebuilding homes or planting new crops, it came from the resilience, courage, and care that had carried the villagers through the disaster. Among them, Amira became a symbol of that hope. The little girl who had survived alone in the charred forest was now safe, growing stronger each day under the watchful eyes of Idris and the community. Her recovery was gradual, but each day brought new milestones, a stronger step, a brighter smile, a laugh that resonated with life once more. Idris remained a steady presence in her life. Though he had initially come to the village to help, he quickly became much more than a helper. He was a mentor, a guide, and a protector. Every morning he would check on Amira, ensuring she had enough food and water, helping her dress, and encouraging her to explore her surroundings safely. At first, Amira had been hesitant, uncertain of the world beyond her hollow, but Idris's gentle guidance gave her confidence. She began to walk along the edges of the village, curious about the world she had been isolated from, and slowly she learned to trust again. The villagers watched this transformation with admiration. They had witnessed the miracle of Amira's survival and were now seeing her return to life, not as a fragile child, but as someone full of quiet strength and resilience. Mothers and fathers in the village often approached Idris to thank him, not only for finding Amira, but for nurturing her spirit and helping her reclaim her childhood. People marveled at his patience and skill, noticing that his actions were not loud or boastful but quiet, consistent, and deeply caring. He had given the child what she needed most: safety, love, and the freedom to grow again. Amira, despite the trauma she had experienced, began to show remarkable courage. She learned to climb small hills, collect water from the nearby stream, and tend to a tiny garden that Idris helped her plant. These small tasks, which might have seemed ordinary to other children, were monumental achievements for her. Each step represented a triumph over fear and a reclaiming of the world that the fire had threatened to take from her. She began to speak more, asking questions about the forest, the village, and her mother. Idris answered with care, giving her truthful yet comforting explanations, ensuring that her curiosity did not overwhelm her with fear. The story of Amira's survival and Idris's heroism spread beyond the village. Travelers and neighboring villagers came to hear the tale, inspired by the courage of the little girl and the quiet strength of the man who had found her. They spoke of the tiny footprints in the ash, the blanket that had kept her safe, and the way Idris had carefully guided her back to the village. These stories were told and retold, growing into legends of hope and perseverance. Yet in the village itself, everyone understood that the real miracle was not just the survival, but the care, patience, and love that had made it possible. Amira continued to grow under the support of the villagers. Each day brought new experiences. She laughed with other children, played simple games, and helped in small ways with the rebuilding efforts. Though she often asked about her mother, Idris would remind her gently that her mother's love was always with her, that her courage had guided her through the fire, and that surviving alone was proof of the strength that had been nurtured within her from the beginning. These words gave Amira confidence and a sense of purpose, helping her understand that she carried a part of her mother's spirit with her wherever she went. The village itself flourished in new ways. Inspired by the resilience of Amira and the quiet guidance of Idris, people began to work more closely together. They shared knowledge, supported each other emotionally and practically, and created a network of care that strengthened the entire community. Gardens were replanted, houses were rebuilt with care, and the children learned not only lessons of survival but also of kindness, courage, and hope. The fire, though devastating, had inadvertently brought the villagers closer, teaching them to appreciate life, community, and the value of protecting one another. Idris's presence, though temporary, left a lasting impact. He never sought recognition or reward. His motivation had always been simple: to ensure the safety and well-being of a child in need. Yet the villagers could not help but admire him. He had transformed a tragedy into a story of hope, teaching everyone that courage was not always loud, that heroism often comes quietly, and that careful, patient actions can save lives. Idris's influence extended beyond Amira. He inspired adults and children alike to be more aware, more compassionate, and more resilient in the face of challenges. Amira began to take on small responsibilities herself. She helped younger children in the village, shared her limited knowledge of survival with them, and even tended to small tasks around her temporary home. Each action strengthened her sense of independence and confidence. Though she would always remember the fire and her time alone, she began to understand that the world could also be a place of care, safety, and love. Her small victories, celebrated quietly but sincerely by the villagers, became part of the fabric of life in the recovering village. Evenings in the village became times of reflection and storytelling. Families gathered near small fires, sharing meals, memories, and stories of resilience. Amira listened closely to these stories, seeing herself as part of something larger, a community that had survived together, supported each other, and grown stronger despite adversity. The villagers spoke often of Layla, Amira's mother, honoring her courage and love. Though she was gone, her spirit lived on through her daughter. Amira's story became a living tribute to her mother's foresight, care, and bravery. Idris, though eventually preparing to leave the village, continued to ensure Amira's safety and well-being. He taught her lessons about the world beyond the village, the importance of paying attention to details, the value of patience, and the strength that comes from caring for others. He reminded her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Amira absorbed these lessons quickly, her resilience growing stronger with each passing day. The villagers, witnessing this bond, understood that Idris's guidance had given the child a foundation for a life of hope, wisdom, and courage. The day Idris finally decided to continue his journey elsewhere was bittersweet. Amira had grown attached to him, and the villagers had come to rely on his quiet wisdom. Yet everyone understood that his mission had been fulfilled. He had ensured the safety of a child, restored hope to a village, and inspired a community to see resilience and kindness as guiding principles. On the day of his departure, the villagers gathered to express their gratitude. Amira, standing beside Idris, hugged him tightly, understanding in her small heart the depth of his care and the courage it had taken to help her. Life in the village gradually returned to a new normal. Homes were rebuilt stronger than before, fields flourished again, and the community grew tighter, bound by the shared experience of surviving and recovering from disaster. Amira continued to thrive, her childhood slowly returning, filled with laughter, curiosity, and small adventures. Yet she never forgot the lessons of the fire, the forest, or the man who had found her. These memories, though tinged with sadness, were also a source of strength, guiding her as she navigated the world. The story of Amira and Idris became a permanent part of the village's identity. Parents told their children about the importance of courage, hope, and compassion. The villagers remembered the quiet strength that had carried them through the fire, the resilience of a small child who survived alone, and the extraordinary care of a man who had saved her. These lessons were passed down through generations, shaping the values of the community and ensuring that the memory of bravery, kindness, and survival would endure. Amira herself grew into a young girl full of empathy and understanding. She helped other children, cared for animals, and assisted neighbors in practical ways. Though her mother was gone, Amira carried her spirit within her, honoring her memory through kindness and courage. The villagers often remarked on how remarkable she was, considering all she had endured. Her survival and growth became a symbol not only of individual resilience, but also of the power of community, care, and love. Years later, the story of the fire, the lost child, and the man who found her continued to inspire everyone who heard it. It was told as a tale of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, courage, kindness, and careful attention could make a difference. Amira grew to understand the depth of her mother's love and Idris's guidance, appreciating how both had shaped her life. She realized that survival was not just about enduring danger, but also about embracing the support and care offered by others. Through all this, the village thrived. People rebuilt not only their homes, but also their relationships, their trust in one another, and their belief in the possibility of hope after tragedy. The story of Amira and Idris remained central, inspiring generations to be brave, compassionate, and resilient. And in the heart of the village, a little girl who had once been hidden in the ashes grew into a young woman who carried her mother's courage, the lessons of a quiet hero, and the spirit of a community that refused to give up. The village learned that life, though fragile, was also resilient. The fire had tested them all, yet they had emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more united. Amira's survival reminded everyone that hope could shine even in the darkest moments, that courage often comes quietly, and that ordinary people, like a gentle mother or a humble farmer, could perform extraordinary acts that changed the course of lives. Her story became a living lesson of endurance, love, and the enduring power of human kindness.